For centuries, Iran was the enemy, a shadow in the east, a name whispered in war rooms, a nation painted in prophecy, but only through the eyes of fear. But I ask you now, what if the land of Persia was chosen, not cursed? What if buried beneath the headlines, beneath the missiles, beneath the fear, there's a secret so ancient, so sacred, that even the Vatican once swore to seal it shut? What if Iran holds the key, not to destruction, but to revelation? You were never supposed to ask these questions, but you're here now. Think about it. In the book of Isaiah, God calls Cyrus of Persia his anointed, a pagan king used as a vessel of divine mercy. Imagine that, God using someone outside the covenant, someone unexpected. But the story doesn't stop there. Esther was in Persia. Daniel had visions in Kandi, Persia. The destiny of God's people has always brushed shoulders with that empire. And yet the world only sees Iran as a threat, the enemy of the West, the villain of prophecy. But what if the enemy you feared was the mirror God held up to your soul? What if what you thought was darkness was actually the hiding place of light? Brethren, there are ancient scrolls that never made it to the pulpit. There are visions locked away deep beneath St. Peter's, whispers of a role Iran must play before the end, a role so critical, so shocking, that even popes trembled to speak it aloud. In the sealed halls of the Vatican, beneath marble and time, Iran's destiny is written. But I promise you, it is not what you've been told. So I ask you now, could it be that the very nation we've misunderstood for generations was never our enemy, but our test? Could Persia rise again, not in rebellion, but in prophecy? Before we go on, stop and reflect. Comment below. Do you believe Iran could play a divine role in prophecy? Ensure to like and hit the subscribe button. Feel free to tell us where you're watching from, because after this, you won't see Iran the same way again. And maybe, just maybe, you won't see the Bible the same way either. So now, let us return to where it all began. Not in the West, not in Rome, but in the East, in the land once called Elam, then Persis, and now Iran. You know it today through the lens of geopolitics and fear. But the Bible calls it something else. It calls it chosen. Persia, yes, Iran, has a sacred thread running through Scripture. A thread that most overlook, perhaps because seeing it would change everything. Let me show you. Turn first to the scroll of Isaiah, chapter 45, verse 1, and read it slowly. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him. Cyrus, not a Jew, not a prophet, not a priest, but a Persian king, anointed, the same word used for Saul, for David, for the Messiah himself. God called this man his anointed. He held his right hand. He gave him power. He opened doors no man could shut. Now I ask you, when was the last time you heard a preacher say that? Cyrus didn't worship Yahweh. He wasn't circumcised. He never stood in the temple courts. But still, God chose him. He chose Persia. Why? Because the God of Abraham is not bound by borders, not even by blood. He will raise a voice from the east to shake the west. He will use the foolish to shame the wise. He will use Persia to awaken Zion. Do you remember what Cyrus did? He freed the exiles. He restored the Jews to Jerusalem. He funded the rebuilding of the temple, not with a sword, but with a decree. That scroll, known as the Cyrus Cylinder, still sits in a museum, inscribed in cuneiform, yes, but echoing with divine fingerprints. And yet, the church rarely mentions his name. Why? Because it's easier to demonize a nation than to discern its destiny. Now turn to the prophet Daniel. You'll find him not in Jerusalem, but in the courts of Babylon, and later, in Persia. It was there, within the walls of Susa, that Daniel received his final visions. It was there that the angel Gabriel appeared to him. He was old, tired, fasting by the river. But heaven hadn't forgotten him, and heaven had chosen Persia as the stage. The book says, I was in Shushan, which is in the province of Elam. Elam, modern-day Iran. The vision of the ram and the goat, the clash of empires, was seen in Iran. The final countdown began in Iran. And then, there was Esther, the hidden queen, the orphan girl turned intercessor. And where did she live? Not in Judea, not in Galilee, but in the palace of Ahasuerus, the Persian king. Her story? The salvation of the Jewish people. Her stage? Iran. Without Persia, there would have been no Esther. Without Esther, no Purim. Without Purim, no preservation of the royal line of David. Do you see it now? From the mouths of prophets, from the hands of kings, from the voice of exiled daughters. Persia is not a footnote. Persia is a thread, a divine thread. And now hear this, not from a theologian, not from a historian, but from the mouth of one called Pope Leo XIV. The nation so often demonized today was once God's instrument of mercy. The church knows this, but few are allowed to speak it. Brethren, truth is not always silenced by fire. Sometimes it's smothered by tradition, by politics, by fear. But here, now, we uncover it together. Let every eye that sees and every ear that hears understand. Iran is not just a nation. It is a question God has left open. And in prophecy, unanswered questions often carry the greatest weight. Now that your eyes have been opened to the true roots of Persia, let us step further into the prophetic realm, into the pages of visions seen through fire, spoken through trembling lips, and sealed until the appointed time. The book of Daniel, the 8th chapter. A vision that has shaken empires and puzzled scholars for centuries. Daniel writes, Then I lifted up mine eyes, and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns. This ram, Daniel was told, represents the kings of Media and Persia, one horn higher than the other, the higher one rising last. And then came a goat from the west, swift and fierce, with a great horn, identified as Greece, led by Alexander the Great. 2 ancient superpowers, one from the east, one from the west, a clash that echoes into modern times. Now listen carefully. This was not just history, this was pattern. Persia rising, then being struck down violently, the west overthrowing the east, and yet, in the ashes of that fall, Persia was never fully destroyed. It merely went quiet. But what happens, brethren, when the ram rises again? Could this ancient vision be cycling back? In the year 2025, Daniel's vision may no longer be metaphor, it may be movement, it may be headlines, because the spirit of Persia is stirring, and the West, again, is watching with fear in its eyes. But there's more. Turn to Ezekiel chapter 38, a darker prophecy, one of war, alliance, and apocalypse. The word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog. It speaks of a coalition, a great army rising in the last days. And among the nations listed, Persia. Yes, Persia is there, marching alongside Magog, united with Cush, Put, and Gomer. Some say this is a war against Israel. Others say it's a cleansing. But what's often missed, what no pulpit dares to whisper, is this. The presence of Persia in Ezekiel 38 does not necessarily make her the villain. It makes her involved, central, unavoidable. You see, the enemy in the last days isn't just about geography. It's about alignment, spiritual allegiance, and allegiances can shift. Pope Leo XIV once said in private correspondence, never published officially, but whispered among clergy, Persia's hands are not clean, but neither are her feet bound. She walks the border between curse and calling, one spark, and she may tip either way. That is the mystery. That is the tension. That is the terror of truth. Brethren, the West fears Iran because of what it has done, but heaven may be watching because of what it may become. The ram has two horns. One may still rise higher than the other. The alliances of Ezekiel may be forming in shadows, but ask yourself, if Persia is among the final players, could it be because she holds a final piece? We are not told she wins. We are not told she loses. We are told she appears. And in prophecy, appearance always precedes purpose. So now, with eyes opened, look around. Are we witnessing prophecy fulfilled, or are we witnessing prophecy forming? Either way, we are no longer looking ahead. We are living within it. Now listen closely. This part was never meant to be public. It was never meant to leave the walls of the apostolic palace. And yet, as truth stirs beneath the silence of centuries, you must hear it. Because some truths don't wait for permission. In early 2025, a letter arrived at the Vatican, not through diplomats, not through official channels, but by smuggling hands, tired, trembling, and holy. It was wrapped in worn linen, frayed at the edges. The ink had faded, but one thing stood out: a seal. Not Roman, not Persian, but something older. A cross woven with a flame. Half Hebrew, half Zoroastrian. Two faiths, ancient enemies, tied together by fire. The courier, an exiled monk from the underground church in Iran. No name, no title, just a plea scratched in Latin across the first fold. Legatur ab oculis solis. Let it be read by eyes of light only. The letter was taken, under veil of night, to one man, Pope Leo XIV. And he read it. And what he read shattered his sleep. The contents? A vision, not political, not poetic, but prophetic. The monk wrote of a moment, not far from now, when Persia would rise again, but not with missiles, not with tanks, with revelation. He saw it, a movement beneath the surface of Iran, not military, but theological. A return, not to Islam, not to Judaism, but to something far older, to a light buried before Babel, before Abraham, before Eden was sealed. He called it the voice of the East, a voice that would cry out in the desert and stir confusion in Rome. And the letter said this: Persia will rise again, not with weapons, but with words. And when she speaks, the church shall tremble, not because of war, but because of memory. The monk claimed he had seen scrolls, ancient scrolls hidden beneath Yazd, a holy city in Iran, known for its Zoroastrian roots. Scrolls written in fire-etched script. Scrolls that spoke not of conquest, but of a time before the fall. And here's what stunned Pope Leo XIV. One phrase in the letter, written in Hebrew, translated directly to, "The garden shall echo from the east." The garden? Eden. Brethren, the monk was suggesting something most have never dared to whisper, that Iran, the land we now call hostile, may hold keys to pre-Adamic memory, that its soil still carries echoes of Eden. What if that's why the enemy fears her? What if that's why the nations tremble? Because prophecy does not care for politics. It obeys only the voice of God. Pope Leo XIV later wrote, privately, in his theological journal, "I have seen the ink of old fire. I have read prophecy clothed in exile, and if this is true, then Persia is not an enemy. She is a question." He underlined those words 3 times. And what does the church do with questions it fears? It buries them. But questions have a way of rising, especially when the desert wind blows the sand from forgotten stones. Iran is more than a nation. It is a veil, a riddle, and maybe, just maybe, God is preparing to answer it. Through fire, through exile, through a voice crying not from Rome, but from the East. And now, we arrive at the part of the story that no one wants to believe. Not because it's too fantastic, but because it's too close, too human, too painfully true. Iran, modern Persia, is not empty of faith. It never has been. Beneath the ashes of empire, beneath the rubble of revolution and regime, there are still candles burning, hidden, but not forgotten. There is a church in Iran, not one built with domes or towers, not the kind that files permits or hangs signs. No. This church moves like a whisper. It lives in silence. It prays in risk, and it grows, in secret, house to house, breath to breath. Brethren, did you know that Iran has one of the fastest growing Christian movements on earth? And yet, you will not find it in the headlines, because it is not a movement of power, but of pain. And it is in that pain that prophecy is forged. The believers in Iran, most of them former Muslims, risk everything, their freedom, their families, their lives. And still they sing, still they baptize, still they open ancient scriptures by candlelight. The world sees Iran as hardened, hostile, irredeemable. But the Father sees something else. He sees a remnant, a flicker in the dark. And perhaps he sees a mirror. Because remember this, dear soul, the church began in persecution. The gospel was born in Roman prisons. Truth was written in blood, not ink. So when we look at Iran today, we are not seeing our enemy. We are seeing our origin. There are pastors with no pulpits, priests with no robes, evangelists who speak only when the Spirit says run. And they do not run from fear. They run because the fire within them is too bright to extinguish. Pope Leo XIV once said in a closed-door gathering, "The Christians in Iran are not behind. They are ahead. For they worship as the early church once did, with trembling hands, unshakable faith, and no promise of tomorrow." He paused after saying that, and he wept, because he knew these hidden Christians are not the exception. They are the reminder. They remind us of what the church was always meant to be, unseen, but unstoppable, crushed, but never conquered. And now prophecy turns its gaze eastward, not toward palaces or capitals, but toward these forgotten saints. The seeds of Eden were not planted in Vatican gardens. They were scattered to the caves, to the deserts, to the places Rome forgot. And perhaps some of them have taken root in Iran. Brethren, if the soil is blood-soaked, if the faith is costly, if the songs are sung through tears, then surely God is near. He does not forget his scattered ones, and he often hides his greatest treasures in the places we fear the most. We have spoken of Persia's past. We have touched its prophetic presence, but now we must confront a mystery that sits at the very heart of apocalyptic expectation. The Third Temple. You've heard of it. You've read the prophecies. A structure yet to rise, a place where heaven and earth will once again meet, for glory, for judgment, or for both. But here's the question almost no one dares to ask. What if Iran is connected to the Third Temple, not as a destroyer, but as a condition? The prophecies are layered. They do not shout, they whisper. But the whispers all point to this. Before the temple is rebuilt, a threshold must be crossed. Some rabbis, those outside the mainstream, the ones who study in shadows, not synagogues, they believe something radical. They believe that before the Third Temple can rise, peace must come. With Persia. Let me say that again. Peace. With Persia. It sounds impossible, maybe even offensive, but the ancient sages speak of a redemption trigger, a moment in time when an unlikely alliance softens the soil for something divine to rise. Some even go further. They whisper that when Persia bows not to Israel but to truth, the veil over the nations will begin to tear. And then, the temple will no longer be a dream. It will be a demand. And Pope Leo XIV, he was briefed on these interpretations. In one of his private addresses, never published, he said something that silenced the entire College of Cardinals. When Persia bows, the veil will tear again. They didn't understand. Some thought it was poetry. Others thought it was heresy. But Leo was speaking prophetically. He was pointing not to a war, but to a turning, a spiritual fracture, a prophetic realignment. Iran, once ancient Elam, then the kingdom of Cyrus, now a nation in chaos, may be holding the key, not to destruction, but to completion. And what of the temple? What if its foundation isn't just stones, but souls? What if the true catalyst is not a red heifer, nor a political treaty, but a remnant in Iran? What if the hidden Christians in Tehran and the secret seekers in Isfahan are not just resisting tyranny, but unknowingly preparing the ground, not just for revival, but for the return? Brethren, these are not conspiracies. These are convergences. The more the church ignores Iran, the louder heaven seems to whisper her name. And the louder the scholars scoff, the closer the scriptures come to life. This is not about taking sides. It is about watching signs. And signs are speaking, even now. Could it be that when peace comes where it is least expected, God will move where he was least invited? Could Iran, our enemy on paper, be heaven's condition for a prophecy fulfilled? Pope Leo XIV asked once behind closed doors, what if the temple waits, not on Israel, but on Persia? And now, we reach the final breath of this journey, the part where the mystery tightens, where prophecy stops sounding like a story and starts feeling like a mirror. You've heard the verses, you've seen the signs. But deep down, you already knew something was coming, something beyond the noise of headlines, beyond the pulpits and politics. Because truth, real truth, doesn't shout. It waits, and then it reveals itself, like lightning splitting the night. Brethren, we live in a time of confusion, where kingdoms rise and fall, where war drums echo beneath the headlines, where sacred names are tossed like slogans, and ancient nations are reduced to villains in someone else's story. But God has never written like man. He speaks in silence. He hides revelation in contradiction. And more often than not, he places his greatest signs in the places we fear to look. Persia, modern-day Iran, has become one of those signs. You were told she is the enemy. You were trained to see her as a threat. But prophecy may be whispering something altogether different. Not an ally, not a savior, but a trigger, a test, a veil. The question is not what Iran is. The question is what God will allow her to become. The early church feared Rome, but it was in Rome that Paul preached. The prophets feared Babylon, but it was in Babylon that visions were born. And now the church fears Iran. But what if Iran is not where the story ends, but where it restarts? Pope Leo XIV wrote in the margins of an unpublished manuscript, one that only a handful of cardinals have ever seen. Truth is not chained to Jerusalem, nor is it bound to Rome. It walks the borders, searching for those who can bear it. And maybe, just maybe, truth has walked into Iran, the underground church, the hidden saints, the whispered scrolls, the dreams and visions of fire and tears and returning kings. Could it be that while we sleep in comfort, God is rebuilding faith where it costs everything? Could it be that while theologians argue and governments posture, he has already written the next chapter in Farsi? So I say to you now, look again, not with fear but with fire in your spirit. Open the book of Daniel. Open Ezekiel 38. Read Isaiah 45. And ask, not your pastor, not your politician, but your soul. What if the land we've demonized was never a curse but a crucible? What if Iran was not created to destroy, but to reveal? And what if that revelation is already unfolding? One soul at a time, one whisper at a time, one page at a time. Brethren, the truth has always been hidden in plain sight. The church fears it, the scholars doubt it, but now, you know. Comment below. Do you believe Iran could play a divine role in prophecy? And if you seek truth, not tradition, if your spirit is stirred and your eyes are beginning to see, then I invite you, subscribe to this channel, Pope Leo XIV Truth. Because here, we don't run from the uncomfortable, we walk straight into it, with scripture in one hand and fire in the other.